My sister stabbed my baby shower cake 47 times. She stood in the center of my ultra-modern Hamptons manor, screaming that I had ruined her life while the silver blade sank again and again into the $800 hand-painted designer frosting. One strike for every single month, she claimed I had robbed her of her dream life. The elite chatter of 50 guests died instantly, replaced by the wet thud of metal meeting sponge. Then, Brianna turned. Her eyes were blown wide, unseeing, as she lunged the serrated blade directly toward my 8-month pregnant stomach. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. I did not scream. I did not even move. I just watched as my mother, Kimberly, lunged forward. But she was not jumping to intercept the knife. She was grabbing my arms, pinning them to my sides with a strength that would leave purple bruises by morning. Do not move, Madison, she hissed into my ear. You will trigger her. Just let her get it out of her system. Behind her, my husband Justin stepped in front of Brianna. But he was not disarming her. He was shielding her from the horrified stares of our guests. His back to me while I stood there, a captive target for my own sister's blade, in that sterilely, white-walled manor in the Hamptons. The silence was louder than Brianna's screaming. It was the sound of a 29-year-old high-end designer finally hearing the truth of her life. I was not the successful daughter. I was the human shock absorber. For years, I had been conditioned to believe that Brianna's fragility was an emergency and my stability was a convenience. This was a house built on the normalization of cruelty. A psychological trap where the abuser is rewarded for their instability while the reliable one is punished for their strength. I realized then that my arms were pinned because I was the only one in the room Kimberly knew she could control. Brianna was the golden child, a failed influencer whose every tantrum was treated like a tragic performance art piece. I was the scapegoat, the cash cow whose success paid for the very wine they were now drinking as they watched me face a knife. This was my learned helplessness in action, the invisible chains that kept me silent while my sister tried to erase the future I was carrying. But as I looked at Justin's protective stance over her, something snapped. The fear did not leave me, but it turned into a cold, hard clarity. Mom, let go of me right now, I said. My voice was not shaking anymore. It was as flat and sharp as the blade Brianna was still clutching. Kimberly released me slowly, looking at me with disgust as if I were the one making things difficult. Justin finally turned around. But he did not ask if I was okay. He just looked at my stomach and then at Brianna, who was now sobbing on the floor. She is going through something. Madison, he said coldly. You need to think about that before you start a scene. I did not say a word. I did not wait for an apology that would never come. I walked out of my own home, through the sea of guests, with their phones still recording, and drove to a hotel. They thought they had exiled me. They thought my silence was submission. They had no idea that I was done being the silent investor in their drama. I sat in that sterile hotel room, the glow of my phone, the only light against the darkness. My phone buzzed with a text from Justin that read, "We need space to think. Do not come home yet." Seconds later, a message from my mother followed, informing me they had changed the alarm codes for my own safety. They thought they had locked me out, but they forgot I was the one who designed the manor. I opened the custom smart home app on my laptop. I did not need to hack into anything. I had integrated the security protocols myself during the renovation. One click, and the nursery camera flickered to life. I was not just checking the crib, I was watching the vultures. There they were, sitting in my kitchen, drinking a bottle of my 1982 Chateau Margaux like they were celebrating a victory. Justin had his arm around Brianna, who was no longer crying. She was laughing. She is finally gone. I heard her say through the high-definition speakers, "Now we just have to make the psychosis narrative stick." My mother, Kimberly, nodded. her face illuminated by the under-cabinet lighting I had painstakingly selected. "Justin is right," she said. "With the baby coming in 3 weeks, we will use the incident at the shower to file for a conservatorship. If we prove she is mentally unfit, the estate remains under our control. Just like your father wanted." My heart hammered against my ribs. But I did not let the panic take hold. I was an architect of spaces, and I knew how to find the rot in a foundation. I began a systematic audit of the family's digital footprint. For years, I had trusted Kimberly to manage the estate portfolio my father left behind. I had been the cash cow, too busy building a career to notice the slow bleed of my inheritance. The screen glowed as the transaction history loaded. There it was, a $1,800,000 embezzlement trail. Over the last 22 months, Kimberly had been siphoning funds into an offshore account in Brianna's name. They were not just protecting a fragile sister, they were funding a lifestyle on stolen ground. The most devastating receipt appeared in a hidden folder on our shared cloud. It was the original, unedited version of my father's will, the one they tried to suppress. It did not leave the assets to Kimberly. It bypassed her entirely, leaving every property and every cent to his firstborn grandchild, my daughter. The psychosis narrative was not a concern for my health, it was a business strategy. They needed me declared incompetent before the birth so they could keep their hands on the $1,800,000. I stared at the video of them clinking glasses in my kitchen. They saw a victim. I saw data, and I was about to perform the most brutal audit of their lives. The days following the hotel room discovery were a blur of fast-forwarded motion. I did not spend a single minute weeping over a husband who was plotting to have me committed. Instead, I became a ghost in my own industry, moving with a precision that comes when you stop caring about feelings and start caring about leverage. While Kimberly and Justin were busy leaking concerns about my mental health to our neighbors, I was securing the final fragments of my father's legacy. My father, an architect of legendary suspicion, had always warned me that greed has a specific smell. He did not just leave a manor, he left clues. I spent those 48 hours gathering every scrap of evidence he had hidden in the physical structure of the glass house and the digital vault of his firm. I had the original deeds, the recorded conversations, and the signed affidavit from the notary who had witnessed the real will before Kimberly had lost it. The trap was set for the following Saturday. Driven by a hubris that only the truly entitled possess, Kimberly and Justin organized the Healing and Heritage Gala at the Glass House. They invited the pinnacle of Hampton's society, including the very investors my father had worked with for decades. It was a masterpiece of social engineering designed to cement Brianna as the new conservator of the family assets. They told the guests that I was currently in a private facility receiving specialized care for prepartum psychosis. They played the role of the grieving, supportive family to perfection. Brianna even wore my vintage sapphire earrings, a symbolic theft of the dignity they thought I had forfeited. I watched the live feed from my car, parked just outside the security gate. I saw them on the terrace, greeting guests with tragic, practiced smiles. They looked untouchable. They looked like the rightful owners of a life they were systematically dismantling. But as I touched the signet ring on my finger, I felt a wave of cold irony. They thought they were holding a funeral for my reputation, but they had actually built the stage for their own public execution. I waited for the moment Justin stepped up to the microphone in the grand ballroom. I smoothed my dress, took a breath for the daughter I was carrying, and stepped out of the shadows. The architect was home, and the foundation they were standing on was about to give way. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom swung open with a silence that felt deafening. I stepped into the room, 8 months pregnant, radiant, in a charcoal silk gown that draped over the life I was protecting. I did not run. I did not scream. I walked with the measured gait of an architect returning to inspect a faulty build. At the far end of the room, Justin stood on the raised dais, a glass of expensive bourbon in one hand and a microphone in the other. He was in the middle of his spin, his voice thick with a manufactured tremor that made my skin crawl. "It breaks our hearts that Madison could not be here tonight," he told the crowd of 200 elite guests. "But as many of you know, her mental health has taken a tragic turn. She is currently in a private facility, getting the specialized help she needs for her safety and the safety of our unborn child." The room was so still, I could hear the faint clink of a server's tray in the back. I saw the pity on the faces of my father's oldest colleagues. I saw Brianna standing behind Justin, dabbing at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, looking every bit the victimized sister. Then, someone in the front row gasped. Justin's eyes shifted, locking onto mine. The supportive husband mask did not just slip, it disintegrated. His face went a sickly shade of gray, the sweat beginning to bead at his hairline as he realized the unstable wife he had exiled was standing 10 feet away, silent and undeniable. "Actually, Justin," I said, my voice carrying through the ballroom without the need for a microphone. "I am right here." The sound of the crowd was a synchronized intake of breath. I did not stop. I walked straight to the tech booth at the back of the room. The young technician looked at me, then at the frantic signals Justin was making from the stage. I did not ask for permission. I simply bypassed the system, using the override code I had built into the Glasshouse's infrastructure 3 years ago. "You all came here to celebrate heritage," I told the room, my eyes never leaving Kimberly's as she gripped the edge of a table. "So let us look at the real legacy of this family." With one tap on my phone, the heritage slideshow of my father's sketches was cut short. The massive 60-inch projector screen behind Justin flickered, then stabilized. The image that appeared was not a blueprint. It was the high-definition security footage from my baby shower. I watched the crowd watch the screen. The pacing of the room slowed to a crawl. I wanted them to see every microsecond of the truth. There was Brianna, her face contorted with rage, plunging that silver knife 47 times into the cake. There was the sound of her screaming that I had ruined her life. And then, the room collectively recoiled as the footage showed Kimberly lunging forward, not to disarm the attacker, but to pin my arms to my sides while the knife came for my stomach. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, save for the digital audio of Justin's voice on the screen, whispering to Brianna 5 minutes after the attack, "Do not worry. The psychosis narrative is already in play. She is out of the house by tonight." I stood there, the uninvited architect of their downfall, and watched the hubris bleed out of their faces. The data did not just speak, it executed. I did not let the video fade to black. Instead, I let it loop on the screen, a digital indictment of my mother, pinning my arms and my husband's cold betrayal while I uploaded the next set of data. The silence in the grand ballroom was so thick it felt like physical weight. I could hear the rhythmic ticking of the antique clock in the hallway, the sound of Justin's frantic, shallow breathing, and the clink of ice in a glass as someone in the third row dropped their drink. "Let us talk about the money," I said, my voice echoing through the sterile, high-ceilinged space. Because this heritage gala was not about family honor. It was a marketing event for a theft. I swiped my phone, and the projector shifted. The next slide was not an image. It was a cold, hard ledger of numbers. July 12th. Transfer of $400,000 from my father's estate to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Recipient, Brianna. I read aloud. August 15th. $250,000. September 22nd, $500,000. In total, $1,800,000 has been bled from my father's portfolio over the last 22 months. The crowd leaned in. I saw the investors' men who had trusted my father for 40 years pulling out their own phones to take pictures of the screen. The slow-motion pacing of the room intensified. I wanted them to see every cent. I scrolled slowly, detailing the stolen rent from my father's properties, the liquidation of stocks meant for my child's future, and the forged signatures that authorized it all. Brianna was not just going through something during the baby shower, I said, looking directly at my sister. She was desperate, because she knew I was starting to look at the books. She stabbed that cake 47 times, because there were 47 missing entries in the ledger that she could not explain. Kimberly stood up, her face a mask of aging porcelain. Madison, this is private. You are being vindictive. You are sick. No. Mom, I replied, clicking to the final document. I am an architect. I follow the blueprints. And this is the blueprint you tried to burn. The original will of my father appeared on the screen, the one witnessed by a notary you did not know I found. The text was highlighted in bright, clinical yellow. I leave my entire estate, including all liquid assets and the property known as the Glass House, in a trust for my firstborn grandchild, Justin, and Kimberly's entire social position. This house, the cars, the wine you are drinking tonight, it is all a rented illusion. I told the room, they are the definition of the empty wallet syndrome. They have the appearance of power, but they possess no character. They have spent my father's legacy trying to destroy his heir because they knew that once this baby was born, their subscription to luxury would be cancelled. Brianna shrieked, a raw, ugly sound that tore through the sophisticated atmosphere. That money was ours. We earned it by putting up with you for years. The crowd recoiled. The viral effect was happening right before my eyes. Guests were already hitting send on their recordings, broadcasting her confession to the world in real time. I watched Justin. He was looking at the investors, his mouth opening and closing like a fish stranded on a beach. These were the people who provided his real estate leads, the people who funded his lifestyle. I could see the moment he realized he was socially dead. His reputation was not just damaged, it was incinerated. You all invited the elite here to witness a conservatorship announcement, I said, stepping away from the tech booth. But instead, you have provided the witnesses for a felony. The police are already in the driveway. I did not linger on the rage. I stood there in the center of the ballroom, 8 months pregnant and entirely alone. But I'd never felt more secure. My father had taught me that a house is only as strong as its foundation. I had just cleared away the rot. I do not need to commit you to a facility, Justin, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to carry further than a scream. I am just committing you to the truth. And the truth is, you are a stranger to me now. As the blue and red lights began to pulse against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the glass house, the hubris finally evaporated from my mother's eyes. She realized then what I had known since the hotel room. The architect was home, and she was no longer accepting excuses for a faulty build. The blue and red lights continued to pulse against the glass house's pristine exterior, turning the ultra-modern sanctuary into a crime scene. I stood by the door, watching as the Hamptons elite shuffled past me in a hush of embarrassed whispers, their judgment now firmly fixed on the trio remaining on the stage. Justin tried to follow me out, his face a frantic mess of sweat and desperation. He reached for my arm, but I did not flinch. I simply stepped out of his reach. Madison, please, he begged, his voice cracking. We can settle this privately. Think of the legal fees. I just need a stipend, a legal allowance to get a defense team together. You cannot just cut us off while we are in the middle of this. I looked at him with the same cold, analytical eyes he had given me when I stood in that hall facing a knife. My compassion was an investment you overdrafted a long time ago. Justin, I said, my voice like ice. I do not give legal allowances to strangers. And that is all you are to me now. The foreclosure on the glass house moved with a clinical speed that would have terrified the old Madison. Within 30 days, the bank had reclaimed the manor that had become a monument to my family's greed. Kimberly and Brianna were forced to vacate, moving from the pinnacle of luxury to a modest rental in a neighborhood they used to mock. The $1,800,000 was systematically recovered through the courts. Every cent returned to the trust my father had intended for his real legacy. 3 weeks after the gala, I was in a different kind of house. It was not a glass manor designed to be seen. It was a sunny, quiet home with solid walls and new locks. My daughter, Claire, was born on a Tuesday morning, while the sun streamed through the window, a quiet, powerful entrance into a world that was finally safe for her. I used the recovered funds to establish the Eleanor Foundation, a sanctuary dedicated to providing legal and financial support for single mothers facing systematic harassment and family exploitation. I realized that the best revenge was not just the destruction of my enemies, it was the construction of a life so bright that their darkness could no longer reach it. As I rock Claire to sleep in a room where the door stays locked to everyone but the people I have chosen, I think about the letter I never sent to my mother, to everyone who has ever felt like the invisible one in their own family, who has been treated like a burden by those who were supposed to be their shield. You are not the problem. You were just a giant in a room full of people who were terrified of how far you could reach. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to stop asking for permission to exist and start building your own foundation. If you have ever had to close a door on a toxic person to save yourself, share your story below. Your courage might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Do not forget to subscribe for more journeys of justice and new beginnings.